Okay, guys, welcome to the Fast Break podcast. We are thrilled today, and I am absolutely honored to welcome Dr. Rosie Mead into the Fast Break podcast. Dr. Mead is a mental performance coach who works pretty exclusively with a lot of NBA players, a lot of professional players, and high-level players. And I wanted to bring her on today because as we're in the process of starting basketball season, it is a huge time to start focusing on the mental piece of the game, especially for these professional athletes who several of them have a huge grind ahead of them for the next 5 or 6 months. And I am really excited to get her take on the tools that she uses to get her athletes prepared prior to their season starting and, of course, through the course of their season, as there are so many ups and downs in a basketball season. So, Dr. Mead, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And like I told you earlier, I've been following you for quite some time. And I hope you don't mind I steal a lot of the stuff that you put out there to share with the young athletes and the individuals that I coach. So welcome aboard, and I am sure thrilled to have you.
Brilliant. I'm excited to be on here. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So, my first question, of course, which I was kind of right before we started this podcast, you had mentioned you don't come from any kind of a background. So, I'm really curious to kind of get your story and have you share a little bit about how you got involved with this, and then more importantly, kind of how you worked up to where you started working with professional basketball players.
Yeah, so my route into this is not conventional at all, which is kind of my approach to mental performance, and you'll find out more about that. I come from a brain health background, so I worked in healthcare for a long, long time. All of my academic research was in music psychology and how we can use music to enhance our sort of brain health and brain performance. And then I guess COVID hit, and so my healthcare work took a bit of a tumble. And it gave me a chance to look at other avenues. And so I started looking at music in sports psychology, which,
Huh.
by the way, if you don't know much about it, is a fascinating area. So I did a lot of research in that field. It was massive procrastination from my PhD. I was actually finishing my PhD,
I
and I
can
decided
imagine.
to, for some reason, go and research another field as well while I was just doing this. It wasn't
Uh,
challenging enough, clearly.
yeah, right. You weren't busy enough.
Nope, I wasn't. And so then I was like, well, music in sports psychology is part of a bigger picture,
Huh.
which is around mental performance. And I'd always worked on my own mindset. Like for years, I'd been working on my own mindset. But then once I started looking at mental performance, it then just kind of clicked for me. I was like, oh, mindset is piece of the puzzle, like music is a piece of the puzzle. There's part of this much bigger picture of mental performance. And so I'm a practical person. So although I love theory, I love reading, I'm itching to put it into practice. So I was reading all this information about mental performance and I was like, yeah, but I've got to do my own kind of framework and I got to test this because I want
Yeah.
to see if it's working.
Yeah, right.
So I found lots of different athletes. My husband is a triathlete. So I worked a lot with like endurance athletes, like ultra marathon runners, like people doing like crazy things like this. I worked with a guy who did a Guinness World Record. I was his mental performance coach. He
I
did
read that. Yeah.
yeah, the triathlon. So he did 70 half Ironmans over 73 days. It was insane. So I
Wow.
was his mental performance coach to kind of
Wow.
just keep him going. That challenge then finished and it makes no sense, but I went on holiday to France and I just had a random dream that I worked with an NBA player out in
Hmm.
LA, and it was one of those dreams where like it just felt so clear to me. I'd actually never seen a basketball game. This is how
Oh,
crazy it is.
really?
This was 2.5 years ago, so not that long ago really. I'd never seen a basketball game. Didn't even realize it's that big over here. Now I know we actually have like a we have our professional league and everything in England. I didn't
Yeah.
even know that. But when I woke up the next morning and I was journaling on like what could that look like if I went out to LA and if I worked with an NBA player? For some reason there was some kind of draw and I was like, okay, you got to go find a basketball player. You got to test this out with the work
Huh.
I'd already been doing with other athletes
Yeah.
because the sport is almost kind of irrelevant because I'm very much an inside out person.
Uh-huh.
So I found, yeah, a guy that was playing in England. He then tested out my work with me. Well, maybe luckily, but I found him in the off season. So we did
Huh.
some work. It was kind of like July, August time. We
Yeah.
did some work in the off season. And then when the season started, he was like, oh my God, I'm performing so much better than I did last season. and people were
Phenomenal.
commenting on it, and he was like,
Yeah.
you need to do something with this. So I mean, that's the story, the very random story about why I'm here. And I went straight to the pro level because that dream had kind of told me that that's where I was going to be.
Yeah.
And because I'm not on the skills side, because I'm on the, the inside and
Yeah.
stuff, optimizing everything to help you to perform at your best, I was like, why not? Why not just go in at that dream? And I
Yeah.
very quickly worked with a EuroLeague player who had played in the NBA before. And then I worked with NBA players, and it kind of happened
Gosh.
very quickly.
That is phenomenal, and it's so funny because most people in our field, they go, if they're in the, if they go through the educational part, they go through PhDs in sports psychology and stuff like that. There's people like me that have kind of spent their whole life in basketball and realized probably in the last 10 years, really where the mental piece comes into play. And then it's hilarious because you rarely find people like you in your situation of let's try this out, and obviously having a huge impact and huge success. That's a great story. I mean, that's phenomenal. And I've got to ask you regarding Andy, who was the triathlon guy, right? Andy Stone.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I've got to ask, a guy that puts himself physically through what he had to do. I mean, I and again, you don't have to spend a ton of time, but I am so curious on some of the things you helped him with to keep going, because I can't even imagine physically and mentally what he had to go through to get through that.
Yeah, it was a huge thing. I mean, we worked together for about 4 or 5 months leading up to the event, because there was a lot of, why are you doing this? Like, you're going
Yeah,
to need to have these things. And we would write things down and he'd have them in a jar. And I'd be like, right, when you need it, you pull on that jar. During the challenge, I actually sent him postcards every single day. Well, I gave his girlfriend like the pack of them. So like, I was like, give
that's
it to him
awesome.
every day.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
these little motivational bits. But ultimately, the mindset in some ways is similar to how I work with the basketball guys. And I saw your previous guest was talking about this, about, playing present or thinking about the next play. So with Andy, it was the same. It was like, whatever happens today, like, don't hang on to it.
Yep.
Tomorrow, like tonight, you're going to get, proper recovery. I was big on recovery and rest. And then tomorrow is like a clean slate.
Yeah.
And you've got to kind of bring your mind into that rather than, oh my God, it's day 60. And we
Yeah.
did have a blip. I think we were on about, I don't know, day 15, 16. Like it was relatively early. And he had to finish the challenge by midnight, like for it to count for the Guinness World Record.
Yeah.
And we had a blip where his girlfriend rang me, and it was like 9 o'clock at night, and he still had the last bit to do. And she was like, Andy's just wandered off. He doesn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, we
And
can't
so me
find
and
them,
his
right?
friends, and so me and his friends were like, oh my God, look, we need to try and get hold of him. And we did, and we managed to kind of like rally him round and be like, just do this last bit.
Wow,
Just do the
how
run. And then we did, and he finished like just before, it was like, I don't know, 20 minutes before midnight. We were like, okay,
wow.
we're good. But
And
then
he
with that, I
got
had
there.
to then be, yeah, but then obviously he has to go again the next day.
Yeah.
So the next day I was like, don't think about yesterday. Today is clean. Like,
Yeah.
you just focus on today. Don't think about tomorrow.
Yep.
And yeah, and that, so in a way, I mean, it's at an extreme, but it's still that same mentality of you've
It
just got to be present, focus on
yeah.
today.
It still
Hmm.
applies, even especially going through something like that, the absolute most exhausting thing your body can probably go through. And then the mental, yeah, just like guy, you almost, if you start thinking about the next day or guy, when am I going to go to bed? And oh my gosh, yeah, it's so, you'll
Yeah.
just see a meltdown, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's probably why we saw that kind of meltdown at, relatively early on. Like you think,
Yeah.
and I'm sure it was about kind of day 14, day 16, out of, he was going to do 70 days, but he actually got an infection towards the end, so it was 73. But you
Wow.
think, you like, that's relatively early. Like, how did he start to lose it then? And
Yeah.
it's like, because it's very easy for your mind to be like, shit, now I've got, 60 odd days left or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And it's
I
like,
mean,
oh,
that's,
what? And then you're like, why am I doing this?
yeah, what am I, I'm never going to make this, oh my goodness, I can't
Yeah,
even
it
imagine.
feels too big. Whereas if you
Yeah.
just think about that day, because physically he could do it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a challenge, a real
Yeah.
challenge. It's tough, but he'd done so much training. Like it was literally his mind,
Yeah.
which is why he brought me on board, because he knew that that's what he needed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Golly.
so that
That's an
was
awesome.
phenomenal.
Yeah,
And
that
the
is
last
awesome.
day, like seeing him finish, was like, oh, it was emotional. It was good.
Yeah. Oh, I would. What a great moment. Yeah. What a for
Yeah,
both of you, I'm sure that and what a great moment, guy. That's
yeah.
awesome. So so shifting kind of gears into our basketball world a little bit. Tell me a little bit about especially working with the level of athletes that you've been working with in basketball. How important is it to kind of, I guess, kind of the mental preparation of some of their seasons? Being that in the NBA you've got 82 games. I mean that is not a sprint. That is a long marathon, and kind of talk about how you work with your athletes, how you see athletes prepare for their upcoming season on a mental capacity compared to like physically.
Yeah, so this is so fascinating because my clients work with me during the off season. They know that we do a lot of work during the off season to prepare for the upcoming season. But it's interesting having conversations with other athletes where they're maybe not used to doing this kind of work. And they'll be like, during the off season, they're like, oh, I don't really need to think about my mental game. I'll wait until I have a problem and then I'll reach out. And I'm always saying, no, during the off season is the time to do it.
Yeah,
So what I do with my guys is that we think about, we do a lot of visualization. Like, how do you want to show up this season? Like, what are the words that come to you? How do you want to feel when you're on the court this season? What does like your success look like? How are you defining success? What are the areas you're working on? What are the challenges and how are you going to overcome that? So we do a lot in terms of like actually seeing yourself, see yourself for this season, but don't just do that as a one and done. Like you've got to get the mental reps in as well. So you've got to go back to
absolutely.
that visualization, time and time again during the off season,
Yeah,
just like you're working on your muscles. I mean, it's the same. Often people then go and work with skills trainers, and someone the other day actually was saying that I'm like a skills trainer for the mind. And I'm like, oh, I'm going
yeah,
to grab that because I think people
100%.
will get it. But it
Yeah,
is, you see guys go and get in the gym and they get kind of, bigger over the off season or whatever.
yep,
Well, it's the same for your mental side. You don't just go to the gym once and you're like, right, I'm ready. I'm good for the season now.
yeah,
So it's the same. You've got to keep going back to that visualization and make it like super clear and cemented in your mind
yeah,
so that
absolutely.
you're ready.
Yeah, and I have had a lot of experiences, especially kind of with the youth and youth parents that I work with, where it's there's kind of this little misconception of, oh, I'll just work on this piece of it a little bit, or I'll just work, give me 1 or 2 sessions with somebody, a person like us that's kind of in this field, and we'll get everything straightened out. But like you said, it is the same thing as a physical training. A guy preparing to get stronger doesn't hit the weight room once and hit his goals, right? It's a constant kind of a constant effort to continue to retool and strengthen the mind just like a muscle.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of what I do, because it's around mindset as well, is like I like to think of it as decluttering. So we've got to, especially if you just start with me, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got this
Yeah,
decluttering and stuff. And that takes time to even have that level of awareness where it's like, okay, what are the things that I say to myself? And then I get clients where they're like, oh, I just had this revelation, and they'll text me and be like, this thing just came up, or I just spoke to my mum, and I'm like, oh, like I just realized that there's all this stuff from childhood, and they're like, I need to talk, and I'm like, yeah. And now we can
absolutely.
declutter it
Yeah.
and we can go through all that. But we've got time then to kind of to work through it, but it's not going to be an overnight thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a long-term thing and something that takes just as much focus. And I'm sure you would agree, like the more that that is recognized, especially by the athletes, it's funny, it's one of those things that it doesn't take long to start to see athletes turn the corner when they've gone through some mental performance training. And then it's like they kind of get the buy-in, like, oh, this is making a huge difference. And then you see them get like kind of fully invested into it, and really start to pay dividends.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I see a bit of a cycle. So my athletes, I always say work with me for at least 3 months. Most guys are with me 6 months. One guy's he's coming into his third season with me. But I say 3 months because sometimes I see a cycle where, and we all do this with new habits. You
Yep.
start off, you're like out of the gate. I might say to them, meditate 5 minutes, and they're like, no, I'm going to do 20 minutes every day.
Yeah,
And
of
I'm like, no,
course. Yeah.
let's just start small, start small. But then, you're doing all the things are amazing. They're messaging me all the time, generally only to say, like, things are great. I'm doing
Yeah.
so well.
Yeah.
And then we get to kind of month two, or like, halfway through month two, and then things start to peter out. They start ghosting or whatever. And it's like, okay, we got work to do. This is
Yeah.
when it starts to get harder, because
Yeah.
now you're trying to keep up those habits. And that's, where it's harder when we come into the season as well. If you've started with me during the off season, things are great. You've got all the time in the world.
Yeah.
Now the season starts, and it's like, this is now a real test of, are you going to stick with the habits?
Yeah.
So then we start to notice where things just get a bit shaky, and I'm like, you just got to hold, like, hang in there, but you also have to bring me on the journey, because
Yeah.
this is when you really need the support. But sometimes as high performing athletes, it can be incredibly difficult to say, you know what, I haven't stuck to the plan, and I found it really difficult.
Yeah.
And I still find that fascinating, because I'm like, but I'm the one that you say that to.
Yeah.
Like, this is why you brought me on board. You're not just paying me so that you can say everything's great. I've ticked off everything now. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, that's great for me. That's very easy.
Yeah. Right.
But that's why you brought me on board.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's,
Exactly.
yeah, you see that cycle, and then if they hang on and they keep going and they do it's a cliche, but focus on the process.
Yeah.
But if they do the stuff that I was doing with Andy, then we start to come out of the other side, and then we start to see that come into kind of
Yeah.
fruition.
Yeah. And I love the way you phrase that, because it's the same thing as a player from a physical standpoint. So if you just decide I don't have time, or I can't fit this in, or you start seeing that your training is slacking, the same things are going to happen on the court. You're just going to start to struggle. You're going to start having some setbacks. Same thing for anything. And it's funny how the mental piece is such, to me, an undertrained piece that you see with a lot of athletes. But it takes the same kind of dedication and effort. And as soon as you start slipping, like you said, or oh, I don't have time, it's just like, well, if it's like taking time off from the physical piece. The same exact thing.
Yeah.
You'll start to see the results work against you. So,
Exactly. And I kind of want to add to that, because I always think about how we do one thing is how we do most things.
yeah,
So I think that's where my angle is slightly different, because I look kind of like holistically, and because I'm not coming from the NBA, from the basketball skills side,
yeah,
I'm like, right, if you're coming to me because you're not feeling very consistent with your performance, which is probably the number one reason people come to me. They're like, some
yeah,
games I'm great, others I suck, and I can't tell what's getting in the way, because in training I'm fine.
yeah,
But then I'm like, okay, let's look at where you're inconsistent in other areas. And then if we get to that dip, kind of month two or wherever it is, and they start ghosting, and, I don't hear from them for a while,
yep,
I have to then really call them out. That's when I need
yeah,
my own coaching. I have a coach who has a coach. Like,
yeah,
we all need coaching, where I'm like, okay, I've got to step up, because I can be
yeah,
quite a gentle, kind,
yeah,
caring person. And I'm like, yeah, that's not what they need right now. They need me to step up and call them out and be like,
yeah,
this is why you're seeing your results on the court, because when things get hard, you just block everything out.
yep,
And it's like, how you do one thing is how you do most things. So you're going to see, it showing up there.
yeah,
So you have to kind
absolutely.
of call us out.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting, and it's funny how that sometimes comes into play too, where we're both kind of where you feel like you're almost chasing, but at the same time, like we're chasing for the benefit. That's the same thing as a skills trainer. Hey, you're chasing sometimes, and you see it happen a lot of sports, especially up at the level you're working with these guys get real busy, and they're getting pulled in a lot of directions. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit, like, you now having been through this a few years now, when you're working with your professionals, what kind of mental preparation or mental performance type of exercises are they going through come like a big game, or a big or if it's a big rivalry, or important
Mm.
playoff game or something? What's some of the things that you work them through, where there's maybe some anxiety kicking in and things like that?
Yeah, this is interesting. So I like to keep things simple. Like, my mantra, you might have seen on Instagram, I always say, like, it gets to be simple. So for me, I'm like, the tools, we work out what tools work for the individual. So we get their own kind of toolkit. But the tools will stay the same, but how we use them might slightly differ going into like big games. So
Yeah,
journaling is often my number one thing. Some guys love it. I work with females as well, but I tend to work with guys, so I will tend to talk about guys. Some guys love it, and others it just takes a while to get used to journaling because
Yeah.
they're seeing it as like a dear diary, and it's like, yeah, but there's loads of ways we can
Uh,
journal. So
yeah.
if we have journaling as one of your things, then let's say that you're already using that as an everyday tool. Then you're going into the playoffs. I give them a training plan every week, and it's always I change it depending on what they've got coming up.
Hmm.
So for that week, it might be, writing in your journal, talk to yourself about how you want to show up this week. What does beast mode look like to you? Or
Yeah.
if we,
Yeah.
one guy, he talks about being a wolf. So I'm like, right, talk about that. Like, write
Yeah.
that down, free write, let it go. And then really visualize. So visualization is a key thing. Really visualize yourself going into those games. How,
Hmm.
again, it's like I was saying, pre-season, like how do you want to show up? What's that energy? How are you going to face challenges? Because things aren't always going to go your way, and if we only visualize on the perfect plays and everything, we're
Yeah.
also setting up unrealistic expectations. See yourself
Absolutely.
facing challenges and be like,
Ab-
okay, well,
yep.
how do I like overcome that? How
Yep.
does my best self see that? I do loads of stuff on focus, but these are things that we're doing anyway.
Hmm.
But it's like just remembering that going into these games, practicing your focus, I mean, small stuff like concentration grids, which most of my
Yeah.
clients love, and they get really competitive with it.
Yeah. It's
I
like a
think that's
game.
why
I
they
know
like
those
it.
well. Yeah.
Whereas for me, I'm like, I'm a creative brain, and so I find it's such a turn off. Like concentration grids, my brain just doesn't. It's like, no,
Yeah.
give me some coloring or something that gets me focusing.
Yeah.
But stuff like that where it's like, right, you've got to block out distractions now.
Yeah.
So we've got those tools, and then, like I said earlier about the mental decluttering, now all of a sudden that becomes even more important. What have you
Yeah.
got going on off the court that actually right now you just need to be able to kind of like minimize? Where can you put in boundaries? Where can you just be keeping your head in the game?
Yeah.
And that, that's huge because people talk so much about balance. And actually, I always go on about, like, I hate the word balance because sometimes there's a phrase, and I can't remember who said it, but it's about intentional imbalance. And I love that because I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes there are going to be these points where, as much as we love our family, the game, just for that window, is going to have more of your energy and attention. And that's
Absolutely.
okay. But you can't give everything to everyone around you. You're not going to have that even split.
Yeah.
So knowing where you can just minimize stuff for a bit so that you can get your head in the game and be
Yeah.
like, it's temporary. There's a finite period,
Yep.
and then everything changes again.
Yep. I think you said something there that was so valuable that I think I know younger players that I work with, they don't go through the visualization process of when things do go wrong. They're taught or they heard like I'm just going to think that I'm it's just great thing happening after great thing. And sadly, in the sport of basketball or in life for that matter, that is never how it works, right? And so I learned from a guy a long time ago about the importance of kind of visualizing when things don't go your way and how you react to that.
Yeah.
And working on the side with younger athletes like I do, we talk about, okay, so, you missed an open shot that you felt you should make. And what does your body language look like? And you visualize those type of things. How is your reaction going down the floor? Are you throwing your hands or sagging, moping down the floor and things like that? It's so important to understand that there's that level, especially, and it's good to hear at the pro side too, that, hey, visualize when things don't go your way, how you're going to change or how you're going to react to those. And that's awesome that's awesome to think about it at your level, dealing with your pro athletes. It's the same concepts, right?
Yeah, and I want like youth athletes to know that we all go, like everyone goes through the similar problems. I've also
Yeah.
worked with entrepreneurs. They're
Yeah.
also facing the same things. Like the level that you play at, so like bringing it back to basketball, the level you play at is irrelevant. And I think
Yeah.
that's why I'm at the level that I'm at as well, because I could kind of go to any level and
Yeah.
we'd be seeing the same
Doing
stuff.
the same thing,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. The only extra thing is the like media pressure, that intensifies when you get to those kind of higher levels. But just a couple of things, talking about the visualization, is also something I bring in with the journaling. So
Hmm.
every Monday, I get them to think about their week. And, we have kind of the same prompts for everyone on a Monday. I'm inspired by Brendan Burchard, like the
Yeah.
high performance guru.
Absolutely know
So
them well.
one
Yep.
of his Yeah, he's an amazing guy. So he really got me into this work when I was
Huh.
interested in mindset. One of his prompts is what could trip me up today? What
Hmm.
could trip me up today? And how could my best self overcome it? And
Huh.
it's like, of course, you're not going to know exactly what your challenges are. But if you even let your brain go there and be like, oh, okay, there could be some things that might trip me up, in this game, if you then go to the game as well, what could
Yeah.
trip me up in this game? Then if you've let your brain go there and you've let your brain go to, and my best self would overcome it by
Yep.
doing this, what could I do? Then when you face any kind of challenge on the court, you're like, it's fine, I've got it. Your brain now is like, it's all right, we've prepared.
Yeah.
And you face it in a very different way from if you only focus on the perfect plays, on making every
Over and
single
over
shot.
again, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And although that, it is good, we also have to have some kind of realism as well.
Yeah, right.
To then be
There,
like, you
yeah.
are going to face challenges, you are going to make mistakes,
Yes.
but it's fine because you've rehearsed what you might do if you face a challenge.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely.
that's so key.
So, shifting a little bit, like we talked about kind of focus and concentration grids and stuff like that, dealing with your pro athletes that have these really long seasons, like we mentioned, what tools do you share with them to stay focused through that, through a full season, where there's peaks and valleys. In some cases, they're traveling, 10,000 miles a week, whatever it may be. Like, what are some of the things that help the pro level athletes stay focused on a day by day and game by game basis?
Yeah, so I mean, two things really come to mind with that. One is just like I did with Andy, treating each day, each game as it's a new restart. It doesn't matter
Yep.
what happened before. Actually, there are three things I want to share with you. The other one is, and I had this with a client the other day where he's like, I need help with my habits when I'm traveling. What should I do then? And I'm like, it's the same. You're
Yeah,
just
it's the same
overthinking
thing.
it.
Yeah.
It's the same. So also remembering that whether you're, on the road or you're at home, your habits remain the same. That's actually so good for your nervous system. It's like, okay, we've got constant. It doesn't matter where I am or if the scenery around me changes,
Yeah.
that thing stays constant. So I had to
Yep.
kind of just show him you don't need a travel plan. It's the same.
Yeah.
And then what was the third thing that I was going to give you? No, it's got. I'm sure it was
It's
gold. It
it's
will come
gone.
back to me in
Yeah.
a minute. It's gone. My own brain has got tired. But yeah, I mean, definitely the focusing. Ah, I remember now. Having interests off the court. It doesn't have to be huge,
Yeah.
but having these downtimes. One of my clients loved to paint. So,
Huh.
obviously he's not always able to, for that you need
Yeah.
kind of your materials and everything. But it could be something like reading. Some of my clients love to read, and we do a lot of that to manage social media use
Yeah.
as well, because that's a huge thing that takes away focus and attention. But being like, okay, what else can you do off the court so that when you're having this downtime, your brain isn't constantly thinking about the game.
Yeah.
You've also got to kind of refresh and do some other things, even
Yeah.
just like going out for a walk where you don't use your phone,
Yeah.
like connecting with friends, just doing something else.
Just to
That's a
kind of
really
escape
good thing.
yeah, because especially at that level, they're just so, inundated all the time. Everything
Yeah.
it's so easy to get locked into that's all you do and that's all you know and that's all you think about. And just having, like you said,
Yeah.
that deep breath and kind of escape is really,
Yeah.
really good for your, not just from a basketball player, but just as a human being, good for your mental health to kind of just step back a little bit.
Exactly. And connect with yourself. So I'm working with a client at the moment. We've already been together a year, but he's now transitioned out of basketball. He's just retired, thinking about his next steps. And he's now finding it so much easier to connect with his identity because we'd
Yeah.
already done a lot of this work. I mean, it's
Yeah.
still a challenge, like it would be anyway, but because we'd already done this work and he's actually the one that paints,
Oh, yeah.
where it's like, well, what makes you you? What are your values? What is it about you? And I think that's so important is, this whole identity piece.
Yeah.
So it's like, don't wrap every single moment of your life up in this one thing. Yeah, it's a big part of you. Like, it's huge
Yep.
right now, but there are also other elements and you can bring those in. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's so important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's why, I think it's such a great message because knowing a lot of ex professional athletes myself, when they retire, or if injury were to, or whatever it is that ends their career, there is oftentimes a big struggle of finding who they are, what they like, what they're going to do in their next step, because they are so they are so just engulfed with their athletic identity, so to say, that that is all
Yeah.
they've known. And as you know, especially, most of these guys at the level that you're coaching, they've been engulfed in that sport since they were 8, 9, 10 years old, and it's what they've dreamed of. It's all they know. And I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of guys who end up kind of struggling after their playing days are over. I was a college player, had a great career, but when my playing career was over, it was the same thing. It's like, well, now what? I guess I get a job, and I didn't really know anything different. It's very difficult. And looking back, of course, I wish I would have, like, God, I should have found some other interest and time to relax and find hobbies like painting or whatever it may have been. Players will go through a
Yeah.
little bit of struggle because their identity gets so wrapped up in that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a huge thing, is to think about, okay, but who am I? So like, the title basketball player isn't actually who I am.
Yeah,
It, like I said, it's a really big part, but it's like, okay, what other things interest me, and what could I learn about? So maybe I've got a client at the moment who's working on being more of a vocal leader on the court.
yeah,
So it's like, okay, well, maybe that could be something that you're really interested in, being a leader. And now all of
yeah.
a sudden that's more of an identity. And you
Hmm.
know what? I mean, he's really young. He's not near retirement, although, none of us know about injury. If he's listening, he's going to be like, touch wood, touch
Yeah, he's like,
wood.
no, no, nope.
No, not listening. Um, but like seeing where we can transfer these skills. So if you're
Yeah,
a great leader on the court and that's part of your identity, well, you can be a great leader in different scenarios,
absolutely.
and kind of seeing that as like that identity is a much bigger piece.
Yeah,
That's really
absolutely.
big. And wouldn't that be an
Absolutely.
amazing thing if when you've got time outside of games, even though your schedule's super busy, to also just be diving into these things that you want to learn about? Okay, I
Yeah,
want to know more about being a leader. Well, go listen to some podcasts. When you're
yeah,
traveling or whatever, you do have loads of time, even though a lot of people will say they don't have any time. And I'm like, show me your schedule. And it's like, okay,
yeah,
you've got this really long travel.
yeah. You're going to be on
Go
a
do what you
plane for
want to do.
4 hours. Yeah, right. Yeah,
Exactly. Go read a
yeah,
book. I mean, one, that's great for your brain, but also you're going to take a knowledge. Go listen to a
yeah,
podcast or whatever. And, that would be an amazing use of time to be like, I'm going to use this time to discover who I am.
yeah. Very good point. Very good point. So, kind of shifting into, the mental performance piece has kind of become, I guess you can almost say, mainstream, if you will. You're starting to see a lot more messaging on mental health for athletes and people in general. You're starting to see kind of the big benefits of some players that have talked about mental performance training and working with people like ourselves and other sports psychologists. And so it's kind of starting to gather some traction. One of the biggest struggles that I hear a lot for some of the younger groups that I work with is how their parents, how mom or dad can help in this. Because just like in coaching and having coached my daughter and son, it coming off of dad's voice is not always the best thing. They don't always, even coaching skills or whatever. Sometimes parents, you being a mom yourself, like, well, it's weird that the neighbor can say to do it and you'll do it, but if I say to do it, it won't work, right? So
Yep.
what is, working with the highest level of athlete that you do, what is some advice that you could give to parents on how to share with their youth athlete this experience, and maybe some tools to not only help a sport parent, who oftentimes we can get really tied up into our own kids' athletic performance, but, what is some advice you can share to help parents help their youngsters through the mental performance piece?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is lead by example.
Great.
You've got to experience this stuff. So you can't necessarily be saying to them, well, just see challenges as an opportunity for growth, and, like,
Absolutely.
don't put so much pressure on yourself, or see pressure as, an opportunity or whatever. Like, don't just be saying this stuff. Like, lead by example. Actually do this stuff. Do mental training yourself, because this is good for all of us. Tools like meditation and journaling and visualization, breath
Absolutely.
work, learning how to regulate your nervous system. And if you're learning at the same time, I think that's great as well. If you show them that, hey, I'm new to this too, but I'm going to give it a go. And
Yeah.
maybe we do it together. I did that. This is slightly off topic, but it is really linked where I wanted to get into running. Like I used to run and then I took a break and, and then, like you lose the skill quite quickly. It's kind of like the mental training too. So
Yeah.
I was like, I want to start getting fit again. So I went running with my daughter. She was 9 at the time and we just do a short run. And I loved it because I was showing her that, hey, mummy gets out of breath too. But you
Yeah.
know what? I'm going to keep going, like, because I
Yeah.
really want to do this.
Yep.
So I think, that would be great if you can train together. Like, you don't have to meditate together, but just say, like, oh, have you done your meditation today? Like, I'm
Yeah.
going to do mine. But also share, where do you overcome challenges? I'll tell my children, like, hey, like, I've got this talk today. Like, I'm feeling a bit nervous about it, but I'm going to dial into my music. I'm going to help myself to feel confident. And then
Yeah.
you kind of talk to them. And then afterwards, I'll be like, hey, it was really good. Like I talked to all these people and I felt amazing. And actually share with them that we go through this stuff too.
Yeah.
I think lead by example is probably the only bit of advice that I'd give really. One,
Yeah.
support them, like create that environment where they can be, doing this work. But
Yep.
yeah, you've got to lead by example. You can't just tell them to do something that you're not doing yourself.
Yeah. Guys, such great advice. There's always those roadblocks with parents when it comes because they almost want to give advice, and I love how you phrase that, where a parent wants to, you need to do this, you need to do that, instead of actually sharing. I love that word you just used, sharing through that experience. Hey, we
Yeah.
can grow through this. And just like you said, kind of, hey, here's what I've learned through this. And
Yeah.
actually I love the way you phrase that and actually share that experience with them and what they may be going through and what you've learned and stuff like that, where instead of lots of time, we call it the long card ride home, where you're just trying to beat advice into your kid's head the whole time on what they need to do or should do. Sharing
Yeah.
that
And also,
experience is a great way to put it.
yeah, and I think that's good for us as coaches as well to be like, especially I'm a mental performance coach, but I'm not going to have every answer. Like
Yeah.
remembering that this is a journey, so it's
Yeah.
like I love people having an open mind and being curious. And I'll say that to clients where I'll ask them to do something, and it might be something that's a bit out there, and I'm like, you just have to have an open mind with this. Like you have to
Yeah.
try it. So I might tell them to make a playlist, and they're like, I don't really like music. I just
Yeah.
I have it on in the background, and I'm like, hey, you're just gonna have to bear with me, especially because it's my thing. Like
Yeah.
I have a PhD in this, but
Yeah.
you're gonna
You
just
have, you,
like
especially music, right? Yeah.
but and it's the same with parents. You don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to fire all this advice off. You could, that long car journey home, you could be saying like, hey, like what if you listen to yourself, what do you feel you need right now? What do you think that we could try? And like that's the thing that opens it up now. And then we're going to try
Absolutely.
things and we're going to experiment and get curious, and remembering that this is a journey, and that yeah,
Yep.
you don't have to have all the answers and you don't have to be firing this advice off. It's just
Yeah.
releasing that. I think parents need coaching too, this kind of coaching, because it's like release that pressure from yourself, because the problem is we want to control it because we want the best for our child,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like that doesn't always help because we get really like tight and we hold on to the outcome, just like my athletes do. When
Yeah.
you're holding so tight onto the outcome, we're making mistakes, we're not playing in that flow. Like it's the same if you're coming from that as a parent. Your child's going to be picking up on that, and that's going to be actually making them more tense because now you're like bombarding them with this is what you need to do. And it's
Absolutely.
you don't need to do that. Release the
Yep.
pressure.
Yep. Absolutely. And you see that a lot of times. And gosh, I value so much what you said. And when you talk about parents need coaching too, like a lot of us, but I mean, we're only parents once. We kind of go through this process and we kind of learn as we go. And having kind of gone through what I have gone through and watching parents, in particular, dealing with their young athletes for, God, whatever it's been, 20, 30 years now. I see it both ways, but the best way that I've always found is when parents just kind of let their kid handle their journey. And again, I'm going to refer back to your great advice of just share that with them. Understanding that we're not focused on outcomes, we're focused on the process. We're not, the basketball scene right now is so crazy with NIL money and all, there's so much pressure on these kids and they can feel it. And I deal with it every day and talk to them every day. And, I've got sixth graders that are talking about how much money they're going to get when they get to college. And it's just like, let's just get through, October first, for sixth grade basketball, guy, it just gets so out of control. But I love, again, to reiterate your word of sharing that journey, and don't be so advice giving, whether you're kind of sharing ideas is a great way to put it.
Yeah, and that's something I just wanted to add as well. If you're on that car journey after a game, the three things I ask my clients every single game, whether they win as well, because I think they're always surprised, like, oh, she's still
Yeah,
messaging this. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter. What went well? What could I improve? What do I need to flush? Like,
yeah,
when clients are like, oh, this happened, I'm really frustrated. And I'm like, okay, take the learning, you got to flush the rest. Because
yeah,
tomorrow or in a couple of days, some guys are having 3 games in a week.
yeah,
Like, you've got to go again.
yeah,
So that, what went well, what could I improve, and what needs to be flushed.
yeah. And
And
let's
you can
go get
talk
a
that through as well.
yeah, yeah, and let's go get a burger, and that's the end of it, right?
Yeah,
Because you got the
exactly.
next
And now we
next day's
reset.
coming.
Yeah, we have this. Maybe even you have like a routine where it's like, right, once we do this, then that's like case closed. We're going to reset.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, last thing, we got a couple more minutes and put you on the spot a little bit, but you and I share a very common thing in the fact that we use the term flow state a ton. And for those of you that aren't really familiar with flow state outside of the sports world, it's basically kind of in the zone. So I want you to tell me, what does it mean for an athlete or an individual to be in the flow state, and how that feels, and then how you get to that state and maintain that state.
Yeah. Oh, this is such a good question, though. I will try and keep it short. Otherwise, I'll do a whole
We
presentation.
might be here for the next few
We
hours.
might be here a while. So when clients talk to me about being in the zone, and I can relate because I get this when I'm a musician, like when I'm playing in a band,
Hmm.
is that you're just not aware of what's going on around you. So one client was saying to me, it's like a curtain gets pulled around the court, and he's just not aware of the crowd until the end of the
Hmm.
game, and he's like, oh, hey, you guys were here.
Oh, you guys are here.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, which is really interesting. Sometimes time can slow down, but for some people, time speeds up. The main thing is like time gets distorted. You're just not aware of it. And then people say, I am playing without thinking. Like, I'm not in my head at all. And one of my clients, who's not woo in the slightest, he's like, this sounds really weird, but I'm going to say it. He's like, it feels as if I can just read what my teammates are about to do,
Yeah.
or I can read what my opponents are about to do. And he's like, I can't explain it. And I think this is why some people are like, oh, it's this mythical thing. So when I say to people, you can train to get into that on demand, and they're like,
Yeah.
no, because it's this kind of magicy
Yeah.
woo. Like, even people but who aren't woo, and I'm like, yeah, but you're not. You don't believe in. I do, but you don't believe in this stuff.
Yeah.
So why do you then feel that when you experience it, that it's some kind of out of body like
I know,
experience
right?
when you're not that guy? So now I start to explain the science, and they're like, there's a lot of expletives normally when they're
Yeah, I'm
like,
sure.
this is crazy. And I'm like, I know, but you have to put in the work. So
Yeah.
what I do, I mean, a big thing is working on how you can focus. That's big. So how you can clear your mind, kind of calm things down, realizing what your flow triggers are, because for all of us they're subjective.
Hmm.
So what are the things that would help you to get into that state? So for me, it's that kind of collective, when I'm playing music, that's like a big trigger for me, that kind of
Yeah.
collective music making. But then thinking about kind of, what would help you? Is it the like doing breath work? Is it like connecting your mind and body? What's
Yeah.
going to help you to just kind of like calm things down? And then again, it's the getting the reps in. So it's the doing things like meditating every day, because you've got to practice it. You can't just
Yeah.
now, I've set my intention, I'm going to get into the zone whenever I want, and bam,
Yeah.
like I'm there. It's like you have to get the mental reps in too. But it has to start with that clear mind and being
Yeah.
able to declutter.
Yep. I always found myself as a player, I was able to get myself in that zone or in that flow state after bad games, because I would find myself, kind of like you said, just so lost in the moment in the next game, that it just time almost stands still. Nobody's there. And it's a great feeling because you can almost, like you said, well put, you almost can sense what's coming next, what your player, and you just, it really is a great feeling. And I think, when you talk about the fact that these athletes can kind of control how they can get into that's not just, it shouldn't just be a once a season or, hey, I had the greatest half of my life the other day. Like it's something that can actually be worked on and trained, and getting into that state is such a valuable tool, just to know that that's a possibility. That guy, I can get that feeling a lot more often than I thought, because it does feel like you're kind of out of control, like everything else. But it's great to know that you can get into that zone.
Yeah, and releasing pressure. So, something that I find really fascinating with a lot of my clients, actually, especially if we haven't worked together too long, they'll message me on like the last game of the season, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, I just had the best game of the season. I,
Yeah,
I felt like I was in the zone." And it's because they release that pressure, because
yeah,
they're like, I mean, and if it hasn't been a playoff game or whatever, it's just this is just the last game of the season. Nothing
yeah,
hangs on it. And I'm like, it's just because you released the pressure. Like, we need to work on that for next season so that you
yeah,
can start the season with that.
yeah.
Don't
And you
wait for
can
the
go
last
through.
game.
Yeah,
Yeah, but then that just goes to show, it's like, because I think that what it really does is it enables you to play how you've trained.
yeah,
I mean, people might argue with me on this one. You're maybe not going to perform better than you've trained. Again, it isn't magic. Like,
yeah.
I couldn't just train a non-basketball player to get in the zone and now they're going to be like playing amazing. Like,
There they
that's just
are.
not
Yep.
going to happen. But if you're training, because often people come to me and they're like, in training, everything's amazing. I'm hitting these shots. And then in a game situation, it all flops.
Yep.
So it's like, okay, I see that that's what getting in the zone does. Now you can actually play how you've trained. So if you're
Yeah.
putting in the work on the physical skills, that's what's going to help you to actually put that into a game situation, because you've released
Absolutely.
that pressure. In a
Yep.
training situation, no wonder you're playing better than you might do in a
Yeah.
game, because you don't have that pressure involved.
Yeah.
So that's really big.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Rosie Mead, we can't thank you enough for this time that you spent, and we're 8 hours apart, so we've been working on the right time to do this for a few weeks now. So I'm so glad we got a chance to talk. I'm looking forward to doing this again, and hopefully we can dive into some more things as the season goes, and kind of some off-season stuff as well. But thank you so much for your time, and I know we really appreciate it. The listeners will appreciate it. And again, just awesome, awesome stuff.
Fab. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I would love to come back anytime, because we have got so much more to talk about as well.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. And we will talk very soon.